Hi, everyone, and welcome to this event. We're excited to have everyone on board and to have everyone here today. Just before we start with Marcella's fantastic presentation, let me just quickly kind of go and introduce Data Scientist. Data Scientist, we are a training provider and a training institute for everything tech related. So we have courses around the fields of data science, analytics, data engineering, all the way to DevOps and cybersecurity, all through a fantastic and innovative learning pedagogical program, which combines a platform where you get to learn to code by coding with real professors and experts there along the way to help you out. In case you're ever interested in our training courses, don't hesitate to check out our website, as we'd be more than happy to have you on board. In any case, we're also really excited to invite you today to this webinar held by a person whose introduction she will do better than I will, but a fantastic person we've been working with the past, I would say 2 or 3 years, helping reskill and upskill a fantastic population for one of the larger insurance and financial conglomerates out there. In any case, Marcella, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for your accepting our invite, and really excited to have and to listen to what you have to say regarding can your boss do your job and the power of domain expertise in data science leadership.
Thank you, Theo, and good late morning to everyone, or afternoon, depending where you're dialing in from. And thank you, Theo, for the warm welcome. I must apologize in the beginning because I haven't found a technical solution to change my own slide, so I will have to be asking Theo to support me. But I found it quite bizarrely funny that I'm here to present about domain expertise and I can't even flip my own slides. So good morning, everyone. My name is Marcella. And I've been working with Data Scientist as a client, not personally, but on behalf of a corporation I work for. I work in the financial industry for a large insurance company, and I also work additionally with startup companies and investors. I've had the great chance to explore domain expertise in various contexts, and in the last 5 or 6 years of my career, I had a wonderful opportunity to work with technical experts in the area of data science, data analytics, and AI. And it's been transformational for me, not only such a blessing to work with very smart people. I've learned a lot about the way the whole function evolves and which roles are making up this kind of domain. And I've been learning a lot via recruiting people in these fields and also growing them into various roles and supporting their growth as well. I've come across a lot of these things that we discussed today as an observer, but also being part of different processes as I designed, for example, capability building programs or guided people in their career, professional, and personal journeys. I'm not a researcher, so I'd like to make sure that you know that I'm very honest about the fact that I lean on a lot of findings that I backed up with my experience via the research of others. And you will find the references to some of the things we discuss at the end. I believe we can share this presentation. And there's a lot of good names that if you're interested to follow up with actual research, one of the most interesting persons I came across is Professor Amanda Goodall, who spends a lot of time looking into different domains, and I'll be quoting some of her research as well. May I ask you to show the next slide? Thank you, Theo. I've collected in my career a lot of wonderful and also frustrating moments. I must be very honest when it comes to observing how technical expertise and leadership come together or diverge. But one of the pivotal and memorable moments I have about this area is when I spoke to one of the smartest colleagues I've ever met. He is a fantastic data scientist and a leader in his domain. And he mentioned he's actually sent me a video of Steve Jobs from 1985. So you can find it on YouTube. He looks like a very young person, very different in this photo. And he talks about their experience with hiring general managers. And this is the quote that I captured. But if you have time and interest, I think it's worth listening to the whole interview. He said, "The best managers are the great individual contributors who never ever wanted to be a manager, but they have to be a manager because no one else can do their job as good as they can." In this interview, Steve Jobs describes Apple's experience of reaching a point where they were a recognized company. So they got this advice or this urge to hire general managers. So he refers to a concept that has been given rise in the 60s and 70s, general management. And he goes on to explain how this has been a very bad experience in their case because it has had a lot of implications on the quality of decisions and people's motivations. And I think he goes into, I didn't include this particular part, but he calls them bozos, as much as frustrated he is about people who did not come from technical backgrounds. May I ask for the next slide, please? Thank you. And this is a trend that many of you have definitely either come across yourself because of one back, please. Yes, thank you. And I want to make sure I don't offend anyone in the audience because I'm very well aware that we may have a lot of competent general managers also listening in to this session, and I don't want to dismiss the fact that there are people who are very good at leadership, people skills, and they can apply it very well and efficiently in an area of a technical expertise, leading experts who are much more technically qualified than themselves. However, I'd like to point out that there's been a big shift towards almost not dismissing, but sort of hierarchically making technical leadership of less of a value than the general management. General management started in the 60s, 70s, and it gave rise to a lot of MBA degrees, which are still on the rise. I have some interesting data about this. The basic assumption of general management, general leadership is that people sometimes, often coming from technical areas, can acquire general leadership skills and apply them in any area. So the idea is that you plug and play a CEO into any kind of industry or a senior manager or a manager. And this sort of this assumption puts high important value onto leadership, what we call often leadership skills, which do not necessarily always include technical expertise, but we refer to things like charisma and communication skills and being able to handle things politically, for example. May I ask for the next slide, please? We definitely still see the rise of MBA programs. So it's still the thing, and there's even an increase since certain times of the pandemic, for example, when people took up a lot of virtual learning. when we look at just the ones who are the schools that are just accredited and acknowledged in across the different continents, we see that there is more. Just the top 300 are very easy to find, and there are many more. So since 2011 and 12, MBA has even surpassed the master degrees in education. So people are still very keen at pursuing management degrees. However, we also see a certain tendency of specializing within different domains. So, for example, we see an increase in MBAs in data analytics. I found that personally quite interesting, that the data says that there is over 263% increase in people going for MBA programs in data analytics. And for example, quantitative methods, they see a 75% increase, or strategic management, 54% increase. The biggest top favorite is still finance, and it gives rise to new roles such as finance entrepreneur, or roles that haven't existed before that we typically consider as finance technical. May I ask for the next slide, please? I've observed this myself in my work, but also there is research and literature showing that there is typically a bit of a reluctance, not always, but often, to promote leaders, experts into leaders, and to trust them enough with leadership positions. As if we almost assume that we have to grow into these kind of skills that we typically associate with typical leadership. As I saw practical examples of this assumption not being necessarily true, just reflecting the way we design certain systems, I started looking into evidence of showing that that great technical leaders actually are very good managers and have a very great potential to lead teams efficiently. And there is a lot of evidence and research and from various domains, which I'd like to share with you now. Some examples, but there is much more. Can I ask for? Thank you so much. So I would like to mention, for example, one outcome of a research that showed that that companies that earn more than 1 billion in revenues, 24% of these had digitally savvy boards, and these businesses significantly outperformed others on key metrics such as revenue growth, return on assets, and market cap growth. Next slide, please. Thank you. I mentioned the research of Amanda Goodall and her colleagues as well, and they have been looking into different areas ranging from sports, finance to health industry. And they've done a research with 35,000 leaders around the world, and they found that technical skills were the second most important driver of overall leadership effectiveness after strategic thinking. They also found that the benefit of having a highly competent boss is easily the largest positive influence on a typical worker's level of job satisfaction, which then links to other things like motivation and retention. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. When we look into evidence from different domains, there are certain commonalities that show us that there is a very strong influences of expert leadership. And what does it typically mean when people consider a manager, him or her, to be competent and trustworthy? It turns out that this means that people think that their boss can understand their job very well, it is also interestingly linked to a relatively longer tenure. So not only that these positive outcomes of technical leadership doesn't mean that you just bring in an expert and leave them there for 1 year, although they're brilliant, but people also associate technical expertise together combined with people who have been in a certain business domain or also in an organizational setting to be a predictor, a strong influence on how they feel about their job. And overall, this is then the outcome is that we feel that our manager is more competent when they understand what they're talking about and they've been around long enough to, it doesn't have to be in the same job, but in the same context. The positive side effects that we see are increased job satisfaction, increased effectiveness and efficiency of teams working together, lower fluctuation, increased motivation, accountability, and improved decision making. These big words, they are easily to quantify, and we'll look at the cost side of not having, of losing good people as well for people who are not convinced. But I'd like to also mention something very foundational apart from the fact that we look into very complex concepts such as employee engagement. I think it comes down to very simple things that if we believe that we can trust people who are in decision-making roles because we see them as competent, they can also communicate better in terms of technical content. And they can also assess people's work much more credibly because they simply know what they're talking about and people can relate to these assessments and can respect them better. For those of you who are not yet convinced, I always think money is the ultimate argument. So thank you so much, Theo. So this is a very, very conservative estimate of how much does it cost an organization to replace a data scientist. And why I say a super conservative estimate is because I looked into Gallup's estimate of general estimates of losing and replacing a person, which they say it's about 1.5 to 2 times of the employee's annual salary. And then combined with a very, very conservative estimate of how much of a data scientist earns in Germany. But these are, I would say, the lower levels of when we look at tech companies or other geographical areas than Germany or Europe. These figures go way higher than 120,000 to 160,000. And these costs will not come up directly on a balance sheet, but if you are a person working in the human resource area, looking into people costs and people management, I think that's a very, very important argument to consider. Not only the nice to haves like people's motivation and satisfaction. Can I ask for the next slide, please? Before I move on to the next sections, which are a few slides, not a lot, but on some of the collected ideas on what each of us could do regarding different aspects of this constellation, regarding different roles. Do we have any questions, Theo? I saw you've asked in the chat. No questions. Okay, please drop them in the chat, or we can ask them at the end if you like. I'd like to start with the expert contributors, and these are the people themselves who often have a dilemma whether they should take the leadership path. I personally don't believe there are 2 paths. This is a way we've designed systems and assessment processes, but often these discussions evolve around the fear of technical experts of losing contact with technical depth and content, which is very relevant. It's very real. On the other hand, I think it's very important to consider when you're an expert contributor and you have the ambition to influence decisions and to change the way things are done, to let go of this, a little bit of this technical depth and content, to trade it off for taking on roles and tasks and projects that will give you a more influential role. It's not an easy step to do, and I think it's not for everyone. Also, thankfully, because this way we don't have everyone wanting to take the leading role. Also, technical leadership is still very important, especially in data science, data analytics. I'm quite convinced. But we do need more expert leaders, and this also requires that those of you who are experts are willing to give up a little bit of the everyday depth, at least at work. There's other ways how we can, how I've seen people catching up with staying in touch with technical expertise. But it's a trade-off, and I think without having more of people like you stepping up for responsibilities to make decisions and be part of that, I think the change is very difficult to happen. Another recommendation, which is very easy to say but very hard to implement, is to hold up a mirror to the manager who is not an expert. This is a very tricky one, as not always will come to the non-expert leader side as well. Not every manager who is not an expert and is leading experts is willing to listen and is willing to accept the fact that they don't know enough and they don't know as much as people who they're leading. It is a tricky thing, and without the slight push and nudge of people who are in these teams, these people will be given too much freedom to decide without having enough information. So it is again the responsibility with care, because this is a very tricky situation very often. Also, another thing to consider is to commit yourself to focused, ongoing, self-directed leadership development. This is something to do for all of us, not in terms of leadership development, but when you look at the time you have to invest into learning and growing, don't only look at technical content, but look into business content and look into what we call personal skills content. I'm a big fan of focusing on the strength, so I'm not a big fan of filling the gaps necessarily. And we all don't have to have the same leadership style, and maybe a consultation with a coach or a mentor, which is another point to consider, would help you to see what can you focus on, because we all just have 24 hours in a day. May I ask for the next slide? Thank you. Now we come to the hardest part of this puzzle, and these are the non-technical leaders managing technical staff. And I sincerely hope we have some of you in the call today as well. I've met people who are not technical and who are not domain experts, and they're leading technical teams, and their attitudes range. And definitely there is a clear advantage of people being open and humble and honest to know their limits. So it's for people, for those of you, or if you know people and you want to help them, to influence them in the direction that would support this whole transition into experts becoming leaders. I see there is a formal education part that they can take on. For example, taking on some significant developmental assignments. Like I've seen, for example, managers taking on a small part of a technical project and being very proud of having succeeded because they went through the journey and they've done this and they've actually let their teams see them as not perfect and learning by doing. And there's a lot of opportunities for people to formally educate themselves as well, and I'll come back to this, especially now that we talk in the realm of a data scientist as a provider with high level content and education. We've had people in the organization where I work who have done technical programs, although they know they will not be technical experts, but they just wanted to they invested a lot of time and effort into learning about that area. And a big part of these recommendations for people who are not technical and they're leading technical people is around their attitude. How open and humble and willing to listen they are, so that they can learn on the job as they guide their teams in other areas as well. I found a very interesting case from GE. It's a little bit older, a few years back, where they have actually put an end to growing general managers. So they said the days of general managers are over at GE. And back then they implemented a new corporate rule that people who are leading teams, they have to have at least 5 years of experience in that particular domain. They didn't allow people to hop around in high-speed talent programs anymore, because they recognize the power of people's tenure, not only, but combined with knowing the content and the business side. And that I found really interesting, because they started to revert back to what Steve Jobs actually mentioned in 1985. And last but not least, if I can ask for the next slide, if you're so we're aware that there's a wide mixture of people on the call probably, and some of you may be HR professionals and senior leaders who are designing different programs and processes around succession and hiring and talent development of expert leaders. And there's a lot you can do to promote expert leadership. You can incentivize experts to take on leadership route. And I don't just mean bribing them with money and bonus, but there is a lot of different ways how experts can be elevated, the expertise can be elevated into being recognized organizationally, but also financially, hopefully. Consider experts in succession planning. This is, I think, one of the most tangible, most concrete advice you can ever take on. Just put a name in the box for the next one in the row, and that will automatically trigger a lot of other processes, such as looking at these people, their readiness, what access to which programs, which exposures, which networks they're getting. So please put the name in the box and don't look for a general manager from the outside if you have the choice and if it fits the context. Promote movement with care. So we've seen there's been definitely an era of philosophy around moving people around, giving them exposure to different locations and business areas, and it's been a bit of like a talent on speed era, where we believe that people have to see it all in order to be very good. Actually, the research and what we see in practice is the opposite. We of course want to avoid that people sit on the same job for 20 years, don't develop, don't look outside, don't bring in new people. But a little bit of this balancing and not forcing people to move, because I've worked with experts who are very happy where they are, and they would have the potential to grow in their job, in the area where they are. And just because of pressures being put into being pushed outside into another country, another business area, which never harms. I mean, cross-functional jumps are the best way to push yourself outside of the comfort zone. But managing this with balance is quite a fine organizational skill. Don't overlook technical competence when you are assessing leaders. There's a lot of research on mixing up confidence and competence, which we all as humans are guilty of. And I think this is when we look into diversity and inclusion, this is for me one of the basic diversity and inclusion practices, to look into the different personality styles, not necessarily only disabilities or gender topics. And offer trainings and coaching needed to develop technical and functional experts into skill leaders. So give them access to this kind of education also formally. And last but not least, thank you so much. I'd like to mention Data Science Test because not only because they invited me to discuss with you and hold this webinar, but I'm truly convinced of their content and their product, because I've seen the impact, the journey and the completion it has on people's lives, and what they get out of this, the return on the investment in doing any of these courses and programs and certifications is incredible. And I haven't looked into this, but I'm pretty sure it's very easily tangibly to be calculated financially as well, when we think of skills that automate or just simplify and enrich the way we do things in the different roles, and how people are able to acquire new jobs with the skills they have. We have excellent experience with people completing the programs from Data Science Test, and they range from technical experts who go and they dig deeper into their topics. And these are some of the expert programs that you can see and you probably have been exposed to, or please check out on the website. We see they are of wonderful value because they're designed really by experts for experts. So it's not a generic program that someone just copied paste, but when I speak to people who've done the DevOps program or the engineering one, these are people who are already experienced experts, and they come back to us and they tell us these programs are wonderful and they're so proud they've achieved this. We also have very good experience with people transitioning into the roles of, for example, data scientist or data analyst. And these people go through an incredible growth journey of 10 or 10 months or more or less, and they complete the project, and it opens new doors. This is the one way I can just describe when we speak to them and they tell us what they take out of this learning experience, and a lot of blood and sweat as well. Well, not so much blood, but a lot of sweat. And as I already mentioned, we also see people who I would say even over-invest into taking some of these technical programs, although they know they will probably not be applying for a job as a data scientist or going deeper after this, but they do it because they want to understand. And these are, for me, this is the next layer of the next leadership that I would immediately put into the succession box, because they have understood how to approach this, not necessarily all the knowledge retention, but how that they take time and money to invest in their education. And with that, I'd like to definitely invite you to check out the courses, Data Science Test. I wish I was as smart as a person who complete these programs, because maybe one day I'll have the patience and drive to complete one of these courses because I admire everyone who does it. And if you have any questions, you can also contact me on LinkedIn when it comes to any kind of area with regards to talent development of experts and leaders, or if you want to exchange. Also, if you want to disagree with anything, because there is still a lot of thoughts and philosophies around the fact that expert leaders are maybe not always suited, not always ready. So it's a discussion, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions now or later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcela, and thank you for for this great presentation. We do have a few questions that have popped up, so let me maybe just show the first one, and I can ask the question on behalf of the people, and then we can also benefit from your expertise. So Pierre asks, a lot of technical experts are afraid to take management positions because they will have to leave their comfort zone and deal with human and not machines. How can I help with that?
That's a really good question, Pierre. I don't know if I definitely don't have the ultimate answer, because I'm looking for ideas myself constantly. And it's a very valid point additionally too, because when I spoke, I mentioned that technical experts are worried about losing touch with the content and the depth. And this is a worry number one I came across. But you mentioned a very important one that I think it's even more tricky to tackle, because people are very concerned to even say this out loud. So by the time they actually admit this to you in a various contexts, be it in a coaching, mentoring, or just a colleague session, I find this amazing, the fact that someone has already identified this fear and spoken up about this. I think this is I actually think this is a very good leadership practice already, because people are self-aware and they can describe their concerns and their perceived gaps very well. I've met people who consider themselves great experienced leaders, and they would not be able to do that. I would definitely, what I would recommend is, because we unfortunately live in the world where people are not very always considerate to honesty. I would advise these technical experts who deal with this fear not to go around and say this broadly to everyone, because people then jump too quickly to conclusions and say, oh, okay, then they're not interested to take on this. There's not always openness to deal with honesty. I'll be very honest to say that. However, I think it's a fantastic starting point to look into how can you step by step address this concern. And there is ways to, for example, look into understanding humans almost like a system. And there is a lot of literature or also programs or coachings around how to do that. And I think people can find analogies to humans, looking at them as if it was a system or a machine, and understand them. They're definitely way more unpredictable. But I found, for example, personally, I took time to look into learning more about personality assessments. And once I understood that there is even methodology behind understanding people, it helped me. And I'm a psychologist, and I'm not a data scientist, and unfortunately never will be. But it helped me to sort of make the science about people more objective and more tangible. So look into more concrete methods of understanding humans, of personality assessments, personality types. How can you get yourself? So I would say, complete one of these assessments yourself, and have someone qualified help you understanding yourself like an algorithm, and to see what impacts certain preferences have on how you deal with certain people. Because I think I've also worked with technical experts when I helped them do that, and they started to make connections, and they're extremely smart people. And once you understand, you're less worried. There is no one answer to that, but I think it's something, it's a learning need that is relatively easy to tackle. I would say much more easier than a problematic attitude.
Thank you very much. And we have a follow-up question, which is some technical experts refuse management positions because they feel the pay increase is not worth the increase in responsibility or work. How true have you found that to be, or is that probably a misconception that is also associated with management?
That's a really good question. Again, I think it depends. So I obviously don't have access to. I'm not an expert on expert remuneration, but what I've seen when we looked into benchmarks a little bit to understand our organization, and I think it depends where you work. So I can imagine that some technically technically driven organizations, the Googles of this world, there will be a very clear link between technical, even rising technical responsibility. Whereas if you go into less technically driven organizations, more traditional or very different industries where technology hasn't touched them so much, I think that becomes very tricky because I see what it's a very good question, and again, I don't really have a perfect answer to that. I would How true is that? I think it depends where you work, and I'm always very honest to people. I've had very honest discussions with people who told me they basically don't want to sit in long, useless, as they call, management meetings and committees. I wouldn't call them useless. I mean, they have a purpose in the context they function. But from a technical point of view, it's really a clash of two worlds. I would say the question becomes, which context do you want to spend your time working with and growing? Because if you see that this becomes too obvious, this clash of worlds between the technical and the business and the sort of the strategic part. It doesn't have to be like this, but it depends which organization you're in. And if it becomes too much and you feel like you would have to basically, you would not have this return on the investment in the time you put and the money you get back, then maybe the question is, are you working for the right organization? Because I don't think it's true for every place.
Thank you very much, Marcella, for those answers. I'm not seeing any more questions, so don't hesitate to ask. We still have a few minutes if need be. So waiting for a few questions. In the meantime, I'll also show rapidly the references that you've put up for the various technical expertise and the articles that you've quoted throughout your presentation. For those that are interested, we can send this presentation, and I'm speaking obviously. This would depend on Marcella, so I think if you ask nicely, that might be something we'd be able to do. Um, in any case, we've been delighted to have you on board. It's a great topic, and I think having your intake on that is always very valuable. And in the meantime, maybe just wait for a couple seconds in case just the last second question pops up. But otherwise, I want to thank you very much, Marcella, for accepting our invite and for talking about these management topics, which I think we don't talk enough about, generally speaking. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for attending and for hopping on this webinar today. And see you very soon for another episode or for a future webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice day.